outstanding. He had certain characteristics. They had to have 15 years of terrible performance. They had to have a turnaround and 15 years of spectacular performance. So he finally looked through all these different companies and found 11 companies that he wanted to study to find out how did they go from good to great. So he sent his research team out to figure this out. What was common about these 11 companies? His research team kept coming back and saying, Jim, it's amazing. They all had the same kind of leader. He said, yeah, I don't want to have leadership in the book. There's too much out there on leadership. I want to look at other pieces of the corporate world. I don't want to talk about leaders. So they went back out, came to him again and said, we're telling you it's a leadership thing. He said, all right, well, tell me more. They said every single one of the leaders who had this turnaround had this same characteristic. They had personal humility and strong professional will. Personal humility, strong professional will. It wasn't about them, but it was about the company, it was about the people, and it was about service, but it wasn't about them. That became his opening chapter in Good to Great. He calls it Level 5 Leadership. And the interesting thing is, after he wrote the book, people came to him with all the different principles he had in the book and asked him about, but the one they were most interested in was this Level 5 Leadership. And they asked him, how do you make those folks? Because we think we could use more of them. He said, yeah, I don't know if you can. He said, I think you sort of either have it or you don't. And in many ways, he's sort of, over the years, the book was written about 14 years ago now, he's kind of avoided that question. And I'm not smarter than Jim Collins, but I've learned a couple of things over the years that I think are really, really important if we're going to really be interested in staying over on this side of the spectrum, the healthy humility side. Number one is I've learned that I'm just an instrument in the orchestra, and I'm not the master conductor. I don't control the universe. Now, if I went to each one of you and said, do you control the universe? You would say, of course not. But sometimes we act as if we do. And I think sometimes if we ask people that are around us, hey, does that person act like they sort of pull all the strings, control everything? People around would go, yeah, well, they certainly act that way. Well, the truth is that we really don't. I'm going to tell you, you control a lot less than you think you do. The older I get, the more I see how true this is. I mean, I believe in vision and objectives and goals, personally and professionally, and all those kinds of things, but I hold those a lot looser than I used to, because I realize there's so much that I don't control. And this was brought home to my family in a very dramatic way. So of those 10 children, our 9th child, Daniel, was born with a very serious heart defect. They didn't think he was going to make it through the pregnancy, but he did. And when he was born, he immediately went into the intensive care unit, the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. I'd never even heard of a NICU. Wasn't even on my radar screen. Like, that certainly wasn't going to be part of my life. Why would I need to pay attention to some medical thing or whatever? Oh, all of a sudden, I'm in there, meeting a lot of other families who are discovering, hey, they're just instruments in the orchestra. They're not the master conductor, because if they had written the score to the music, this is not how they would write it. So we spent the first 3 weeks of Daniel's life in the NICU with him all the time. Either my wife or I were there all the time. And he would have a couple of different procedures after that. And then at the age of 9 months, the doctors came and talked to us and said, we've got to do open heart surgery on him, because if we don't repair this, he doesn't have a shot. If we repair it and it works, then he might be able to make it through this. It's very risky, but we're at that point. So we agreed, and at the age of 9 months, Daniel had open heart surgery. They repaired the valves that needed to be repaired and some of the other problems with his heart. And shortly after that, Daniel died. He got a bacterial infection, which is one of the risks. And all of a sudden, this beautiful child was gone. And it was a great reminder that, yeah, we're not in charge of that. But I remember very distinctly that 10 years before Daniel died, I met a man by the name of Admiral Jim Stockdale. Little did I know that years later I would be involved in a center that bears his name. But I met Admiral Stockdale, and he became a mentor and a friend. If you don't know Admiral Stockdale's story, he's a Naval Academy graduate, 1947, fighter pilot, test pilot. He runs the first bombing runs into North Vietnam after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. On 9 September 1965, Jim Stockdale is leading a section of planes in onto a main target, and because of weather, they have to go to their alternate target, which is just a bunch of boxcars on a railroad siding. He has his oxygen mask off because it's like, hey, this is pretty much routine, and he begins his strafing run when all of a sudden anti-aircraft fire comes into that plane. All the red lights go on, and he ejects. And as he ejects into North Vietnamese territory, he ends up in a village where he's severely beaten by the villagers who come in on him. North Vietnamese regulars would actually save him from the villagers, and they would put him in a truck and bring him up to Hanoi, to a place called the Ho Lo, which means fiery furnace. The prisoners would eventually jokingly call it the Hanoi Hilton. Stockdale was not just a POW, he was the leader of the POWs. So that means he had responsibility not just for himself, but for all the well-being of those POWs. And their moniker, their motto would be return with honor. Let's not just come back. Let's come back with our honor intact. And they would do all kinds of things to make sure that that would happen. Admiral Stockdale's leadership would result in him being awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration for bravery. He was a POW for 7.5 years. 4.5 of the 7.5 years, he was in solitary confinement. Oh, by the way, you think you have a communication problem? How do you do that? You're the leader and you're in solitary confinement. Well, they came up with a tap code where they would tap messages based on a 5x5 alphabetic matrix. A through Z was C and K interchangeable, and they would pass the messages around from cell to cell. It's an amazing story. So, as I got to know Admiral Stockdale, and someday you're gonna get to a point where you ask him, sir, how in the world did you do this? And it's interesting that he, without hesitation, gave me a quote that I keep with me ever since. It's actually from a book called The Enchiridion. It's not one of your New York Times bestsellers. It's been written a long time ago by a Greek who was a slave in Rome and then released and started a philosophy school. And he wrote this book, The Enchiridion. Actually, his students wrote it after taking notes from him. His name was Epictetus. And Epictetus wrote the following, and this is what Stockdale shared with me. Remember that you were an actor in a drama of such sort as the author chooses. If short, then in a short one. If long, then in a long one. If it be his pleasure that you should enact a poor man or a cripple or a ruler or a private citizen, see that you acted well. For this is your business, to act well the given part, but to choose it belongs to another. One of the things I've learned about humility is when we get away from this idea that the world rotates around us and it's mainly about us, it's a lot easier to be humble. The world doesn't rotate around you. You aren't the center of the universe, and you control a lot less than you think you do. So it's okay to be humble. Oh, sure. I mean, I can show you Stockdale's life. He worked hard. He demanded excellence of those around him. He studied. He did all those things to be the best he could be. But he also realized that he had to hold things loosely because he wasn't the master of the universe. So that's one of the things I've learned. I'm just an instrument in the orchestra, not the master conductor. Number two, I got to remind myself every day of how important this is. So a former Navy basketball coach who now coaches for the 76ers, and I'm not much of a pro basketball follower, but because of that guy, I'm watching the 76ers. I mean, you want to talk about transforming a team from a 10-win season to a 53-win season to being in the playoffs, it's incredible. Anyway, that's a side note. But anyway, Coach Lang used to tell his players, hey, at Navy, before you go out on the court, you say to yourself, it's not about me, it's about the team. But not just when you go into the arena, every time you lift a weight in the weight room, you say to yourself, it's not about me, it's about the team. And when we go out to practice, before you go out to practice, I want you to say to yourself, it's not about me, it's about the team. I literally do that every day. I get up and I say first, it's not about me today. Everything's not going to work out exactly like how I think it's going to be. I've got to just serve, period. And if I have that kind of attitude, then it's not going to be too much about me. It's It's going to be about others, and then that's going to be absolutely the best way that it can. So the second thing I've learned is I've got to remind myself somehow every day how important this humility really is. The third thing I've learned is I need to say thank you more than I do. It's very interesting. It's hard to say thank you and have it to be all about you. Something happens when we say thank you to another person. We're actually focused on the other person. So it's hard to be all about yourself and saying thank you at the same time. I was reminded of this by a guy named Doc Halladay, who was a baseball pitcher. Halladay pitched for the Philadelphia Phillies and a couple of other teams as well. In May of 2010, Doc Halladay pitches a perfect game. Nobody gets on base. That means 27 batters up, 27 batters down, no walks, no hits. He becomes the 20th Major League Baseball pitcher in history ever to pitch a perfect game. That's a big deal. I don't really follow baseball very much either. I just happened to be watching the press conference after the game where they had Doc Halladay in the spotlight. And all the press are trying to get him to talk about himself. You know, like, do you realize how great this is? And all he talked about was his catcher who kept calling the right pitches. And then he highlighted his first baseman who made the last out of the game to save the perfect game. Oh, wow, that's unique. I like that. In October of 2010, Doc Halladay pitches a no-hitter in the Major League Baseball playoffs and becomes the second pitcher in Major League Baseball history ever to pitch a no-hitter in the Major League Baseball playoffs. Pretty big deal again. I watched the press conference. He said nothing about himself. It was all about the team. Now I was really curious. So I find out about Doc Halladay. I find out that after he pitched the perfect game, he bought a Swiss watch for everybody on the Phillies. All the players, all the managers, all the bat boys, and then I thought what was particularly interesting, the IT people, the marketing people, the finance people, the secretaries, everybody in the Phillies organization got a Swiss watch from Doc Halladay. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to find out what kind of watch it is. So I found out what kind of watch, and then I found out how much it cost. About $1,000 a pop. Now we could all sit here and go, yeah, well, if I made that kind of money, I'd be buying watches for everybody. I don't know, would you? But he did. And then he put that watch in a presentation box, which was really striking to me. He had the date of the perfect game, and then he had their name on the box. I thought that was kind of remarkable. Like, even if I had been humble in the press conference, if I had bought you a watch and I pitched the perfect game, I'm putting my name on that box. But he didn't. He put their name. And then he had this inscription at the bottom. We did it together. Thanks, Doc Halladay. Incredible. I just picture an IT person in the Phillies organization who gets this watch, reads the inscription, and says, we did it together. I was a part of what he did out there. Can you imagine how that made those folks feel? But it was all about because he wanted to be thankful. I've stayed with Doc Halladay, and I feel like I've gotten to know him. And then in December of this past year, he had retired from baseball, and he had gotten a private pilot's license. And he bought this kind of unique plane, and it crashed into the Gulf of Mexico, and he died back in December. Left a wife and 2 children. But the next day, the tweets that came out from people who had competed against him, well, I expected it from the teammates. All these other people all came out to say the same thing about Doc Halladay. What a man of character. Never about him, always about others. A man of integrity, on and on and on. Well, what a legacy. What a legacy he left. And I just want to remember to say thank you more often, because that's going to keep me, I think, a bit more humble. We want to be sincere about it, but looking for those opportunities to say thank you. So I'm just an instrument in the orchestra, not the master conductor. I need to remind myself every day how important this is. I need to say thank you more often. And I need to keep finding role models that lead this way. Role models. I want to see what it looks like. Now, I don't have to do it exactly like that person, but I need some examples to see what it looks like. Those level 5 leaders that Jim Collins talks about. So I'm going to end actually with a story about one of my level 5 role models. His name's General John Grinnells. He's a retired Marine general. You probably never heard of him. You'd probably like that, because it's not about him. Let me tell you his resume, though. He went to West Point, which was obviously his only bad decision in his life. But he went to West Point, and he was a varsity wrestler, All-American, captain of the wrestling team, first in his class academically, a Rhodes Scholar who went over to Oxford after graduation. Pretty talented guy. He comes back and he comes into the Marine Corps because it's the Vietnam time and they were taking West Point grads into the Marine Corps because they needed young officers on the Marine side. So he goes to Vietnam, has all these positions: platoon commander, operations officer, company commander, Silver Star, third highest decoration for bravery, a couple of Bronze Stars, and then some Purple Hearts. He comes out of Vietnam after 2 tours of duty. He goes to the Harvard Business School from the Marine Corps sending him there, works in the White House, becomes a battalion commander, a regimental commander. I mean, it's just the most talented individual probably in the Marine Corps at the time. And I meet him when he's a 2-star general, and he's the commanding general of Marine Corps Depot San Diego. So we have 2 recruit depots in the Marine Corps where we send our Marines: Parris Island, South Carolina, San Diego. And he's got San Diego. The Marine handpicks the generals that go to those 2 places because they're so critical. And he also had all recruiting west of the Mississippi. So he has those 2 kind of big pieces. I'm stationed at Marine Corps Station Yuma, Arizona, down in the southwest corner of Yuma when I meet him. He happens to be coming through Yuma, and he wants to meet with junior officers. So I'm a captain at the time, and I'm in this group that gets invited. It's a little social. Here comes General Grinnells, and he goes from group to group. You know, there are about 3 or 4 of us that are standing together. He comes over. I talked to him for 3 minutes, but there was something about him that was just so remarkable. The way he listened, the way he seemed to care, how articulate he was. I mean, it was this whole package. 3 minutes, that's all I had with him. So I come home and tell my wife, Misty, I said, I met this General Grinnells. He's a really interesting man. 3 months later, I get invited to go to this conference at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. General Grinnells isn't running the conference, he's just providing the venue. It's going to be Monday through Friday. San Diego, I live in Yuma. We have 6 children at the time, all under the age of 12. And I tell Misty, hey, this is a great opportunity. Yuma has a lot of sand. San Diego has sand, but it's connected to the Pacific Ocean. So it's really nice. Like, this would be a great place for us to go for the weekend. So if you're willing, honey, to drive the van over, which is about a 3.5-hour drive from Yuma, I'll meet you on Friday, and then we'll spend the weekend in San Diego. So it's all agreed. She's going to bring the kids. So Friday afternoon, conference ends, I get out of my uniform in civilian clothes, and I'm waiting for the van. Here comes the van, the kids get out, they're all tussling with each other. It's a long drive, and I said, hey, before we go down to the hotel, probably should get a little of their energy out. Let's just walk around the recruit depot here a little bit. So we got all the children, and we're walking along, and there's this nice Spanish-styled house, pretty good-sized house. And Misty, my wife, goes, oh, what a beautiful house. I said, well, that's the commanding general's house. He gets the nice house. And she said, oh, well, who's that? I said, well, it's General Grinnells. I see her mind working, and she goes, wait, General Grinnells, that's who you met a couple of months ago. Same man. She says, so you know him? No. So she says, well, since we're here, we should stop in and say hello. And I said, Misty, normally you have great suggestions. I'm not sure about this one. But my wife can be very convincing. So the next thing I know, I'm on the steps of General Grinnells' personal private house on a Friday afternoon about 1500. So I knock on the door, and there's a young sergeant who comes to the door who helps to take care of the house, a Marine enlisted. And he looks at me, I look at him, and I go, oh, well, my name's Captain Athens, this is my wife Misty, and these are our children, and we're here to say hello to General Grinnells. So the sergeant looks at me with his eyes, as only a Marine sergeant can do. He says nothing, but his eyes say, sir, you're an idiot. But I agreed with him. I don't know why I was there, but just as I'm trying to disengage, Mrs. Grinnell's, originally from Macon, Georgia, with all the hospitality that goes with that, comes flowing into the foyer area and sees the children and welcomes us all into the living room. So as we're now all in the living room, I'm looking around, and I can still picture it so distinctly, all white carpet and a lot of breakable things. And I'm thinking to myself, this is probably the worst place for a Marine captain to actually be. But it got worse. Because Mrs. Grinnell says to us, John Grinnell, John is about to start a meeting. I'm going to have him cancel that meeting and come right home. I'm like, no, ma'am, you really don't. She said, no, I insist. She picks up the phone. John, the Athens are here all the way from Yuma. I think it would be appropriate for you to cancel the meeting. So just the same way my wife has a lot of influence on me, obviously Mrs. Grinnell is the same. Because in about 5 minutes, Joe Grinnell's at his front door, because his office is literally across the street. He's in his dress green uniform. So he got the outer jacket in green and a khaki shirt and a khaki tie and green trousers. And I can remember those stars that he had on his epaulets there that were just gleaming in the San Diego sunshine, and he had about 58 rows of ribbons. I'm thinking, oh man, this is really bad. So he comes up and says, Art, it's good to see you. I remember meeting you in Yuma. He said, introduce me to your family. So I introduced him to Misty, and then he gets up to the kids, and he gets down on one knee in his dress uniform, and he goes to each of the children. I don't think I've met you before. Tell me your name. Goes down the whole group, and then he gets them together like a coach and says, I got a great shark tooth collection upstairs. Let me run up and get it, and I'll bring it right down. So I'm standing on a Friday afternoon, invaded this general's house, and he's now running up his stairs to get shark teeth for my children, which he does. He then gets on the ground in his dress uniform and sorts out the teeth into shark types or something. I don't know what he was doing. And then he says to my children, your mom and dad and my wife and I, we're going to be in this next room. If you need anything, you let me know. We ended up spending 5 hours there, including dinner and throwing a ball for their Labrador Retriever into this formal pond that I'm sure the dog is not supposed to go in there. It was an amazing experience. And I remember looking at General Grinnell's going, I don't get that. I mean, I had seen senior people. They normally didn't even notice little people. And if they did, they'd kind of pat them on the head and hope they went away. I just But there was something about this man that I was very, very curious about. So I kept kind of watching him. Eventually, I worked for him. And I can tell you that anybody who ever worked for General Grinnell's would run through that wall for him, because it was never about him. He built such a bond of trust, because you never had to look at him and go, oh, that decision. So is that mainly kind of his angle? So he gets in front of the, what's he trying to do? Or what's the, never. Because it was never about him. It was always about us. It was always about the mission. It was always about service. It wasn't about him. And there's something that General Grinnell shared with me that I'll never forget. Two things, actually. One is, he said, humility, it's a daily decision and a lifetime commitment. A daily decision and a lifetime commitment. See, Marines, and I'm sure the Coast Guard is much different, we love checklists. I mean, Marines don't do anything without a checklist. And the aim is check the stuff off. And his point was, you can't do that with humility. You think you've arrived, and now you become full of yourself because you're so humble, you're back to where you started. So it's a daily decision that I'm going to live this way, and it's a lifetime commitment that I'm going to lead and live this way. And then he gave me a quote from St. Augustine, the philosopher and theologian, who said, lay first the foundation of humility. The higher your structure is to be, the deeper must be the foundation. Lay first the foundation of humility. The higher your structure is to be, the deeper must be the foundation. Which kind of sums it up in many, many different ways. Humility, it's a challenge. But if we want to live with integrity, lead with excellence, and build extraordinary teams, it's mandatory. Now, can you go out and do stuff without having the humility? Sure, because there's enough evidence of that. But if you want to see the extraordinary ones, I'm convinced this is at the heart of it. So, Questions, comments, pushback? What do you get next? You get a legal brief or something? I've been looking forward to that so much.
No, sir, I'd like to add something that happened in my early career. In 1992, I was an E5, and my dad came up to visit me. He worked in oil fields his whole life, wildcatter, worked for Red Adair, tough man. And I was on the buoy tender here, and I was the only buoy deck supervisor at the time. So Dad, this 180-foot long boat, captained by an 04, 52 people cannot leave the dock without me. That's how important I am. He didn't miss a beat. He goes, boy, never think you're so important you can't be replaced with a $3 ad in the newspaper. That stuck with me for 25 years.
Good for you. It's good for your dad.
Didn't miss a beat.
Wow. See, we need role models like that. We need people who remind us of those things. That's a great story. Go ahead, please.
Colonel, you got influence daily basis with lots of brand new Navy leaders. I'm sure they turn to you and ask, in the political environment we're in, how do we explain to our shipmates and explain to our teams the directions that are coming from our senior political leadership? And how do they grapple with that? You talk about humility.
Sure.
We don't see a lot of that in politics these days.
No.
And how do you explain to them, this is how you need to approach that?
Yeah, we tell them just suck it up. No. I mean, it's a great question. Whenever we talk about this a lot, like how do you put things in context? The image that always comes up is I went to the Army's Command and General Staff College in Leavenworth, Kansas when I was a Marine major. And it was at a time when the Army was downsizing incredibly, like they were cutting multiple, literally divisions out of the Army. And so the Marine Corps was not having the same thing happen to them. So I'm with mainly all these Army officers, and the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Sullivan at the time, comes to speak at Leavenworth, and then he opens it up to questions. And of course, the Army officers are all on him, like, where are these decisions coming from? What are they thinking? All that kind of stuff. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you know what, Major? He said, you let me worry about that. What I need you to worry about is to keep your helmet on with your chin strap buckled and snot coming out of your nose. That was all he said. All I know is I remembered what he said and that picture of the helmet and the whole bit. Like, that's a lot of what we say is that you've got to influence what you can influence there, and don't let the higher level, whether it's all the way up or just the next level up on your ship or in your Marine unit, begin to affect you, that you begin to act that same way. You take care of those folks that are under you, and when you're able to protect them from those slings and arrows of misfortune that come your way, but don't let it start transforming you into that kind of model. We need more that are going to be in a different way. That's a lot of what we talk about when we talk about that.
Colonel? Yeah, question for you, sir. First of all, good call on going to San Diego and staying a weekend from Yuma, because I was in San Diego, visited Yuma. It was like an oven, sir.
Yeah, it was hot.
Yeah. So, as a senior enlisted leader, how do I if I have a member of my command that is on the wrong side of the spectrum, how do I try to get them toward the right side? And I'm sure this could be a whole week-long class on how to do this, but if you have a couple tips, sir, I'd appreciate it.
So, great question. I think we have a responsibility when we have someone who works for us, and this is becoming a damaging thing. And, this is a great debate now of this toxic environment that people can create, but they're really good performers, typically, right? They kind of get the job done, and do we just let it go? And like, oh, he's making me look good because he does such a good job, she does such a good job, I'm going to just let it go. I don't think that's good, because that's the person that eventually goes up higher and affects even more people with that kind of toxic environment. So I always tell people, I think we do have to confront it, but make sure you're worthy of talking about the subject. That would be the starting place. I say the second one is that we really do have to have a relationship with a person to be able to broach this subject, because it is pretty sensitive. And normally an arrogant person doesn't see their arrogance, so this is going to be a surprise to them. So that's why if you call someone in and just say, hey, I just want to tell you, you got a real problem with your arrogance.